All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to take apart one of the most universal and, let's be honest, one of the most frustrating human emotions out there, disappointment. It's a feeling we all know, but what's really going on under the hood?
You know this feeling, right? We've all been there. You click a link, you're expecting something, a web page, a photo, anything, and instead you get this, a digital dead end. It's this tiny, sharp little electronic letdown, a perfect little capsule of what it feels like when expectations go poof.
So let's call it that 404 feeling, because it's so much more than just a browser error, isn't it? It's like the perfect miniature model for that much bigger, much more complicated emotion we're here to talk about. This is our starting point for unpacking the anatomy of disappointment.
So what is it, really? Well, the official definition nails it. Disappointment is all about the gap, the space between what we hoped for, what we expected, and what actually happens. It's the emotional echo of a reality that just didn't match up with the picture we had in our heads.
You know, even the history of the word itself tells a story. It's pretty cool. It didn't even start out as an emotion. Way back in the 1400s, it came from the Old French désappointer, which literally meant to remove someone from their job or their office. Yeah, imagine getting fired. It took until the mid-1700s for it to become what we know today, that internal sinking feeling of dejection.
Okay, so here's something we get tangled up all the time. People use disappointment and regret like they're the same thing, but psychologically, they're really not. The big difference is all about where we point the finger after something goes wrong. Think of it like this. Disappointment looks outward. It's focused on the result. It's that feeling of, man, the result wasn't what I hoped for. But regret? Regret turns that focus inward. It's all about you and your choices. It's that voice saying, I wish I'd made a different choice. It's about what you feel you could have or should have done differently.
So what is going on in our heads when we feel that letdown? Let's dive into the psychology of it all and see how our minds actually process these unfulfilled hopes.
This point from psychotherapist Ian Crabb is really fascinating. He basically argues that our modern culture tries so hard to protect us from ever feeling disappointed that it might actually be bad for us. By setting up this false expectation that life should be perfect, we never learn how to actually deal with the setbacks that are, an inevitable part of being human.
So that leads to a really good question. If disappointment is all about failed expectations, what happens to optimists? The people who are practically defined by their high positive expectations. Does that make them more vulnerable to getting knocked down?
Well, there's a theory called the disappointment effect, and it suggests, yeah, maybe. The idea is that pessimists kind of have this built-in emotional cushioning. They're always a little prepared for things to go south. Optimists, on the other hand, don't brace for impact, so when they fall harder. But it's not the whole story. Other research challenges this, suggesting that optimists aren't worse at coping, they're just way more likely to jump right in and try to fix the problem. And all that effort and struggle is what actually causes their stress.
This emotion is so powerful, it doesn't just mess with how we feel. It actually changes the choices we make. It's such a big deal, in fact, that economists and psychologists created a whole framework to explain it. It's called disappointment theory.
I mean, think about it. Why do we sometimes pick the sure thing with a small reward, instead of taking a risk on something that could pay off big time? A huge part of that answer is our deep-seated need to avoid feeling let down.
And that is the absolute core of disappointment theory. It says that when we're weighing our options, we're not just looking at the potential outcomes, we're also thinking about how we're going to feel about those outcomes. We actually anticipate the future sting of disappointment, and we will often make the safer choice just to avoid it.
This lottery example from David Ebell just makes it so clear. Look at this. In both scenarios, you win $10,000. Objectively, it's the exact same result. But in scenario A, where 10 grand is the top prize, you're ecstatic, you're on top of the world. But in scenario B, where it's the lowest prize and you could have won $1 million, that same $10,000 feels like a total failure. It's all about context.
So what's happening there has a fancy psychological name. It's called upward counterfactuals. But it's really just a complicated way of saying we torture ourselves by comparing what is with what could have been. That little voice in your head saying, if only. Yeah, that's the engine of disappointment right there.
Okay, so this is clearly not just some abstract feeling we have. Understanding disappointment has massive, real-world consequences, affecting everything from the stock market to the legal system.
Seriously, it's a huge factor in all of these fields. Take behavioral finance. Analysts know that just the fear of a stock falling, that anticipated sting of disappointment, can make an investor sell way too early, even when the rational move is to hold on. That fear is a powerful and sometimes totally irrational force in our economy.
And get this, it's so real it even has legal standing. In a famous set of cases known as the holiday cases, courts have literally awarded people money for disappointment. The idea is, if you paid for a fantastic vacation with the expectation of a great time and what you got was a total disaster, the court says that the loss of that expected happiness is a real damage that you can be compensated for.
Which leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If disappointment really does live in that gap between our expectations and our reality, then we have to ask ourselves, how much of that gap do we actually build on our own? How much of our own disappointment is just a side effect of the expectations we choose to create in the first place? Something to think about.